Hello and welcome to today's webinar with IEX Cloud. My name is Adam Wozni and I'm really excited to be here today. We have a fantastic presentation put on by Tim Baker that we're going to dive into in a little bit here. But first, I want to cover a couple things on the agenda today. Cool. So we have a lot to cover, but first off, we're going to do a very fun, brief disclaimer. We're going to get into some housekeeping items on how to use the Zoom webinar for asking questions. We're going to cover a quick poll just to learn a little bit more about the folks who are in attendance for today's webinar. We'll dive into the meat of today's presentation with Tim, and then we're going to try to open it up to some questions here at the end of the webinar to see if we can kind of answer some of the things that you guys pop up. So cool. So a very fun, brief disclaimer. The data and information presented in this video is not investment advice. IEX Cloud's services makes no promises or guarantees herein regarding results from particular products and services, and neither the information nor any opinion expressed today constitutes a solicitation or offer to buy or sell any securities or provide any investment advice or service. Oof. Cool. So now we can get to the fun stuff. So we're assuming that a lot of you guys are going to have a bunch of questions as we're kind of going through some of the topics that Tim's covering today. So you'll notice in your Zoom webinar, there's a little QA button. So if you go in there, feel free to start asking questions throughout the presentation. At the end of the webinar, we will be going through as many as we can to get through and have Tim answer live. However, if we can't get through some of them, I'll be taking some notes and we'll do our best to answer some of those questions over our Twitter page at IEX Cloud. All right, so we do have a quick poll just to learn a little bit more about you folks. So I'm going to open up this poll and we'll start it up. We'll give you guys about maybe 30 to 45 seconds. All right, maybe 15 more seconds. Cool, almost everyone has submitted the poll, so maybe we're almost there. All right, I'm going to end the poll. And it looks like a majority of folks, and actually I'll share the results so you guys can all see it. You can see most people are hobbyists, which is actually pretty cool. A handful of folks are familiar with IEX Cloud, though a handful are not. It's kind of split down the middle in terms of whether you consider yourself a growth or value investor. And most people are having a great day. However, the 37 that said they need a vacation, feel free to send a message on IEX Cloud and we'll talk you through it. Cool. All right, so let me jump in. So we noticed a handful of folks are actually not familiar with IEX Cloud. So I just want to take a couple quick seconds to kind of explain what IEX Cloud is. So IEX Cloud actually formed out of IEX Group, which is well known for IEX the Exchange, which launched in 2012. There's a lot of really fantastic resources about IEX Group and the Exchange and all the other things that IEX Cloud is up to, but the best place to go is just iextrading.com to learn more. Diving into what IEX Cloud is, IEX Cloud is actually a financial data API that allows developers, students, small businesses, startups access to financial data. Traditionally, you would have to go to one of a handful of players that actually offer financial data to folks. And they actually charge very interesting fees. And we kind of have a different business structure. So we actually work with data creators and we use their data and insert it into our infrastructure and allows access to our community of users, access to this data for a very low cost. So types of data we offer are crypto, Forex, stock data. We have premium data that's offered by a few different premium partners. We have alternative data. Basically, if you can think of financial data, we probably offer it. But really, IEX Cloud is much more than just a financial data API. We offer SSE streaming. We offer an Excel plugin, which Tim may actually talk about briefly today in his presentation. We have something called Rules Engine, which will actually notify our community of users and give them updates about the data that they're using on IEX Cloud. And then we also have something called IEX Cloud Gateway, which is an application that sits inside of the OpenFin framework. And to learn more about that, you can go to openfin.co and gain access to IEX Cloud that way. But you guys probably know a little bit about IEX Cloud, so I have the distinct pleasure and opportunity to introduce Tim Baker, who is the head of IEX Cloud, who will be diving into Fund with Fundies and Introduction to Fundamental Analysis. So with that, I would actually like to hand the microphone and video over to Tim Baker.
Great, thanks, Adam. Great to be here, and thanks for the warm-up. Hi, everyone. I'm going to just reiterate that disclaimer. Although I'm a chartered financial analyst, I'm not a financial advisor. The Excel templates you're going to see are all my own work. So forgive me any errors you might spot. I'm going to share them with the community, and hopefully people will dive in and help us make them better. So I'm not going to share my screen just yet. I wanted to start with an overview of fundamental analysis, and then I'm going to show you a couple of examples of how I look at companies through that lens. And then I'm going to kind of bravely put myself on the line, and I'm going to build a screener on the fly, starting with a blank Excel spreadsheet, and we're going to build a screener together. I'll mainly be using Power Query, a tool built into Excel to extract data from the IEX API. It then transforms that data into the format that Excel needs and then loads it. Of course, as Adam mentioned, we have an add-in, and if you want to go this route, that's fine. There's a handy how-to guide and video to get you started, and we're continuing to invest in the add-in. But today, it's not comprehensive enough for what I want to use as an investor. So this is how I get value out of the API. So what is fundamental analysis? Well, the world really splits into two camps. Fundamental analysts or analysis, which evaluate stocks by attempting to measure their intrinsic value. Fundamental analysts study everything from the overall economy and industries, the performance of the company, the financial strength and management. And a key element is clearly the analysis of the financial statements of the company. Its earnings, expenses, assets, liabilities, cash flows, whether it might pay a dividend today or in the future. And I've probably spent 15 years of my life as a fundamental analyst at a big bank. Technical analysis kind of ignores all fundamentals and looks for statistical trends in the way a security or the market's trading. And the core assumption is that all known fundamentals are already priced in. So there's no need to pay attention to them. Technical analysts do not attempt to measure a security's intrinsic risk or value. Instead, they use stock charts and statistics to spot patterns in how the stock is trading. Personally, I'm more in the camp that ultimately fundamentals win over technical, but you'd be a fool not to look at charts and see how a stock trades. You might think a stock is undervalued, but if the whole market is against you, or there's other information in the market that you're not factoring in, you'll probably lose. It's not worth trying to fight the market unless you can take a long-term view. Similarly, investors that just use technical analysis risk the fundamentals of the stock catching up with it. The reality is that stocks often trade on a combination of factors. They could be fundamentally based. They could be fundamentally based, like growth or value. Growth stocks are mostly driven by the promise of future top-line earnings growth, often benefiting from an intrinsic shift or new market opportunity. Value stocks are typically companies with solid fundamentals that are priced below where they perhaps should be, based on some measure of intrinsic valuation. Needless to say, growth companies tended to be valued more highly due to the promise of growing returns, but also offer greater possibility of disappointment, since if growth falls short of expectations, the stock by definition has been overvalued. So growth stocks have a high price to enterprise value or high price to earnings ratio. Value stocks tend to trade at lower price to sales or price to earnings ratios, and also tend to have lower growth profiles, but not always. The key to fundamental investing is weighing whether stocks are over or undervalued against their intrinsic value, which is normally driven by how much growth is already built into the share price. One technical factor that I do look at is momentum, which is not based on the fundamentals of a company, but is a measure of or is measured by those technical indicators. And when stocks have high momentum, it's risky to bet against them. Although again, I believe that fundamentals prevail in the end, but timing that is really, really hard. At IEX Cloud, we provide great fundamental data. We'll talk about and show that later. But if you like technical indicators, we cover that too. We have a technical indicators endpoint in the API. And you can use the same Excel methods I'm going to show to access that data. My personal investment approach is to look for firms with good growth prospects that are trading at a reasonable valuation in relation to that growth. I tend to avoid firms with very high momentum on the back of unsustainable growth expectations, perhaps, but that often means I miss out on stocks like Tesla and Amazon. I should also say that I fundamentally believe in diversification, and funds and ETFs are a great way to do this. But as a retired investment professional, I still like to have fun with Fundies, doing a deep dive on the fundamentals before I invest. By the way, if you want to invest in, say, a basket of growth or value stocks or momentum stocks, you can do that quite easily by investing in an ETF that has a basket of those stocks in them. But there's really no fun in that. Oh, and if you don't want to spend the time categorizing stocks into various buckets, we also have a partner on our platform that ranks stocks by various factors like growth and momentum. The company is called Kavout, and the data is available as a premium data set and can be a useful addition to your mosaic. If this sounds like a lot of work, it doesn't need to be. As well as providing a lot of raw data, we also have API endpoints that deliver hand-calculated or pre-calculated fields, like a company's trailing or forward PE ratios. By the way, I'll generally be talking about trailing ratios here. That's the price relative to, say, the last year's or the most recent year's earnings, as opposed to expected earnings. The math is the same, and we do have forward earnings forecasts on the API. And that raises an important point. This is very much a multi-dimensional challenge. Fundamental analysis needs to be done very much on a relative basis, looking at a company, for example, relative to others with similar growth prospects or similar dynamics like the ones that compete in the same sector or industry, or relative to the market as a whole. You also need to look at valuation through time. Is the company getting more and more highly valued versus the market or its peers? And is that really reflected in the relative performance of the underlying business? And to be honest, in the middle of a pandemic, this has all become very tricky and difficult given the state of various industries, but that makes for lots of opportunities to find hidden value. So that's the quick overview of fundamentals. Hopefully I've teed up the next section, which is going to get into some specific tools that I use. Okay, let me share my screen. Okay, hopefully now you can see my screen. I'm sharing the wrong. Can you see my screen? Can you see my Excel spreadsheet, Adam?
Yep, you're all good.
Right, okay, good. So firstly, I'm not going to cover how to sign up for IEX Cloud. It's really easy. It literally takes a few seconds. You'll be assigned a token, which will give you access to the data. And you'll see how that works in a bit and how the token interacts with the API. Our model is that you get a number of credits that you can use to consume data every month. And if you're prototyping something and don't want to use up your credits, you can use a sandbox functionality, and that won't mean you use any credits at all. I'm also keen to show you how some of this analysis can be done entirely with our free data, but also that I want you to see the value of paying for additional data available in our core subscription, which is just $9 a month, which last time I looked is cheaper than Netflix. This first example requires a paid account because the data required because of the data that's required to make it work. The second example can be done, as I say, entirely with a free account. No add-in or VBA skills or macros are required. All of this is done using built-in functionality within at least the most recent versions of Excel. And if you go back, someone had a question about earlier versions of Excel. There is a Power Query add-in that you can add to Excel 2010 and 2013. And then all the subsequent versions have Power Query built in. It's a free add-in. They're not supporting it anymore, but if you've got an older version, you can go that route. So let's get started with a look at the single stock view. So this Excel spreadsheet I built over the winter holidays, and it's in a few parts. And every few weeks I add bits and pieces to it. Hence the fun with Fundies. The first page you see here is just a few notes for anyone that I share this with, how to get started with the product. This is probably the control center for the spreadsheet, and this is where I can select the ticker. In this case, it's selected F, and it tells me that that's Ford Motor Company. So ticker F, New York Stock Exchange. And I use a very simple built-in function in Excel called a web service. And this is the URL. We'll get into this in a minute, but this is the URL to call for the name of the company from the IEX Cloud API. And so if I were to change this to MSFT for Microsoft, then you can see that it's detected the name is Microsoft. I can also change some settings. I generally look at annual data, but the data that we get from our partner, who I'll mention in a minute, comes in three forms: annual, quarterly, and trailing 12 months. So 4 quarters trailing. And that goes back for 20 years. So once I've selected that, I basically load the data. And I can also load the data by hitting data refresh all. And what it's done, you can see it's loaded some prices, the financials, and dividends. And they're the 3 main data sets that I use to drive the spreadsheet. Down here is my IEX Cloud token. If you want to use this, you'll plug your own token into that, and you'll be good to go. I then set up a page here where you can basically hyperlink to the next page, which is the layout of all of the financials. Now, just a mention about where we get this data from. So this data is sourced from a company called New Constructs. And I've known the founder of the company for probably 10, 15 years. They are a team of forensic accounting specialists, and they take data, file data from the SEC website, which is called EDGAR, and they basically clean it and tidy it and apply a whole bunch of accounting adjustments to create a very clean set of comparable data. I call that kind of standardized or normalized data. Now, the other thing that these guys do is they then do another layer of adjustments on top of that to account for things that might be hidden in the footnotes of the financials. This data, the data that we use, is their kind of standardized format. It's very, very clean. But they also have this premium data, which actually we have available on our platform, which has a lot of additional adjustments that you can get into. So this is the full set of financials, and the data comes in through Power Query in this form. And like a lot of data queries, it's in a kind of an unusual or difficult to use format. You'll notice that these fields are in alphabetical order. Of course, companies don't lay out their financials in alphabetical order. So once I've pulled that data in, I basically reformat it and put it in here. And if I change the company, obviously all the numbers will change. The other thing I've done just for my convenience is I like to remove any lines that have got blanks. So I've got a little kind of rule there that removes all of the blanks. And so now you've got revenues, pretty detailed list of expenses. And some of these, actually, the New Constructs teams do some work on. And then you've got GAAP net income. So that's your earnings. And then we go into the balance sheet. So a really nice, clean format for the balance sheet. And then a compressed cash flow statement. So that's all of the raw materials I need, but obviously this is just like a sea of numbers. And
Hey,
so
Tim.
yeah,
Hey, Tim, we got a quick question that someone just came in about the data you're looking at. Is
yeah.
this all provided under the free IEX Cloud plan?
No, so this first exercise is you need to have a paid account. The next exercise, we're going to have fundamental data, which we draw straight from the SEC website. So it doesn't have the advantage of all of the adjustments that and standardization that new constructs make, but there's quite a lot of utility. And that we've actually just moved access to that data into the free tier. So the screener, and you could build something like this with the free tier. It's just a lot harder because the data is a little bit more messy. So you'll see that in a moment. But good question. The next section is a bunch of per share data, and we're starting to get into some of the calculations that I've made on top of the new constructs data. So for example, the dividend per share data here, I actually pull that in through our dividend endpoint. So this is data that I've pulled in from the endpoint, and it's nice and cleanly. You can see it's quarterly, and I'll show you a chart in a minute of what this looks like. And then I have Power Query assign quarters to this data so that I can match it to the actual year in question, because dividends quite often straddle a year, especially when they're quarterly. So I actually pull that in from another source. And then I've got a number of valuation ratios that I look at. So obviously I've got the price, and that's coming in from our pricing endpoint. I calculate the market cap, and then I've got things like net debt coming off the balance sheet, cash off the balance sheet, and then I calculate EV and various ratios off of that. I also do a free cash flow calculation. Again, that comes off the balance sheet and the income statement. If you buy the new constructs reports, you'll see additional adjustments they make to free cash flow, so you get an even more precise number. I tend to look at margins as well, and I'm a great believer in looking at how a company is performing through time. So I've got 6 years of data. I actually pull in 7 years, and then I can look at the year-on-year growth, or if I switch to quarterly, I can look at the quarter-on-quarter growth. I quite like this analysis. So the DuPont analysis, I've obviously put a hyperlink in there. The DuPont analysis is really a real measure of how the company is driving returns from its net asset base. So the return on equity is the output of that, but you can break that down into 5 component parts. So you can see, for example, are changes in taxation or the interest burden or the EBIT margin, which of those factors are influencing the return on equity? And if you multiply all these numbers together, you'll get the return on equity. And you can see over time, Microsoft has had a pretty dramatic improvement in return on equity. And you'll see the impact of that on the share price. If you're a debt investor, or you're looking at corporate bonds, or maybe you're looking at a company with a bit more financial risk, you might also look at the leverage ratios. So I like debt to equity as a good starting point, but I also like to look at coverage. So I think, so if you look at the equity multiplier and debt to equity are both good measures there. And then the last section, this comes straight out of the new constructs data, is cash conversion. This is quite good at looking at manufacturers and retailers, because it really looks at how quickly or how much a dollar of investment is tied up, or a dollar of sales is tied up in the sales process. So if you're a retail investor, that's a really good one to look at. And that's an important point. Depending on the industry or the company that you're looking at, you'll focus on a different set of data. A company that's capital intensive, you'll be looking more at the balance sheet. Banks, which we're not covering here, whole different set of drivers to value. So a lot of numbers there, but I'm a big believer in looking at those numbers in a graphical form. So this is one of my favorite charts because it's kind of fun to build. This combines the traditional price chart and then plots the dividends on top of it. And again, that was all done in Power BI. I pulled both sets of data in and combined them. Then obviously I'm just showing graphical versions of things like valuation. You can see, like a lot of tech stocks, it's generally got more expensive over the last couple of years, certainly as prices have rallied. But look at that for a revenue growth for a company that was at $80 billion in 2016. It's now at over 140 billion in revenues. It's actually more than that if you look at that on a trailing basis. And that's really helped this yellow line here is the operating margin. So this is a company, and you can see it in the cash flows, that have seen a very solid growth in cash from operations. They've continued to invest. I think this orange line, which is 2016, is probably LinkedIn, the LinkedIn acquisition. And then you can see that they've generally been delevering. In other words, they've been paying down debt. That's what that means. So this is a company that's becoming more and more liquid. So I use the financials to kind of help me tell the story of the company and then ask more questions, because you'll see with the next company, there's lots and lots of questions you might want to delve into. So let's look at another company, which I've also followed for a long time, in the same kind of industry, IBM. And this is very much, again, I won't go through the numbers this time. I'm just going to jump straight into the charts. But the charts really tell a quite different story. So the first thing is the share price has been pretty sucky, to be honest. You can see dividends had a big increase here, but the dividends have gradually slowed in increase, and it looks like they're kind of flattening out. You can see the valuations are generally much lower than Microsoft because it's really not being priced as a growth stock. And you can see revenues. This is pretty amazing. So back in 2016, Microsoft was about the same size. It's now about $145 billion. IBM, on the other hand, and this is after acquisitions, is barely above $70 billion. Now that doesn't mean that this is not a stock you should be looking at, because the yield on this stock is actually around 5 or 6%. So if you're looking for income, this could be a really nice investment. It could also be that this is a value stock where you might see some price appreciation because perhaps it's now a little bit undervalued. And I did notice here that the free cash flow margin, has recovered from the lows in 2017. So, it might be worth taking a fresh look at. So that's two companies. That's a tool that I use. Now we're going to go into the kind of extreme sport end of things. I'm going to scroll down to my notes to make sure I don't mess up too much. So let me open up. I won't close that because we might have some questions. Okay, so blank spreadsheet. I'm going to build a screener. So the first thing to do is to go to the IEX Cloud website. So assuming you've registered, let's get my browser going. Close that. Okay, so iexcloud.io is our website, and once you're set up, where you'll spend a lot of your time is in the API documents section. Okay, now my screener, I want to have some price stuff. I want to know where things are trading, and then I want some valuation stuff, and then I'm going to calculate a couple of simple ratios. But this approach extends across all of our data, so you can really build a very extensive screener from our data. So let's say we're looking for price quotes, and you'll see in this left-hand side, the search has found a whole bunch of different content sets, but the one that I want is this quote endpoint. So all an endpoint really is a kind of a flavor of our API. So it's a collection of data, and the quote endpoint is a really good one because you can see it delivers lots of information about prices, volumes, and this data comes from our own exchange. And because of that, it's actually priced at 1 credit per call. So it's a very, very cheap data set. Now, this data is not usable if you're an Excel user. It's in this JSON format. It's got lots of attributes and flying and inverted commas and what have you. But down below, you will see that there is some additional information to tell you how to access this data through your browser. So look out for these URLs. So I'm going to click on this URL, and well, it looks like it's broken. It's broken because I didn't add my token. So I'm just going to copy my token here, which will unlock the data. I'm going to put that right on the end. And then we'll take a look at this URL. So this is the price for Twitter right now. And you can see Twitter, the ticker is there, and it's asking for the latest price. Okay, so you can see that this URL is constructed in such a way. So if I change this to Ford, the price for Ford is $11 and about 90 cents. Okay, so I'm going to copy that URL because I'm going to need that in Excel. Okay, so let's start building my comp sheet. So let's say I'm going to want to have a ticker here, and let's say I want to have the price. Now, latest price. I'm going to tell you a little bit about why I'm formatting that with a capital in a minute. So I've just pasted in my URL, and I'm going to put in, let's put MSFT in here. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is change this to a table. And the way you do that is insert table, and you tell Excel it's a table. Now that's going to become really important later because Power Query communicates with Excel through tables. Okay, so it's like the intermediary step that you need to build. But I just want to get the price here. I don't need to use Power Query for that. I can use another command called a web service built into Excel. Now you have to remember to put inverted commas around this. Little tricks I've learned over, and there you go, there's the price. So now, great, I've got price, got the latest price coming in to my Excel spreadsheet. Now, now I'm going to show you the power of tables. If you're not a table fan in Excel, if I now put actually I've missed a step. I've just got to do one other thing. I've got to convert this URL into a formula. Okay, so how do I do that? I want to replace that ticker there with a variable. So that's the ticker I want. And because this is a table, it's called it ticker. So that's quite handy. And I also want to, I always forget to put this and in here. Just a minute. This is where people at home are screaming at me. And then I want to make this latest price variable something that also is anchored to the table. I'm going to put $1 and I can delete that latest price. And then I need to just put those in there, and then hopefully, great. So now if I put IBM in here, the magic of Excel automatically copies down my formula and it all works. And if I want to go to the right, it also works. So I've got change percent as the next thing I want in my comps table. And all I have to do, fingers crossed, is copy it. And there you go. Now I'm just going to put that in a percent format, and oh, that didn't work. And that didn't work because Excel doesn't yet know that this is a number. Remember, we're accessing the API, but you can very easily fix that by using the value function. And now it knows that that's a number, not a text string. Okay. All right, doesn't look like a good day on the markets today. And I'm going to do the same thing here as well. Right, so how do I get some fundamental data in here? Because the fundamental data is in a different API endpoint. So let's go back to our IEX Cloud, and I'm going to search for financials. And this goes back to the question that we had earlier. Financials, you can see there's two financial sets here. This one is from new constructs, right? So that's the full set of financials. You can get it for 1 year, 2 year, 5 years, quarters, trailing, all those different formats. the financials as reported comes from the SEC, and the data looks very similar. And every company listed has to file their financials, and they file it in a format called XBRL. And XBRL is a standard, and it's really how we as a company collect that data. We go to the SEC website, pull that data. Now, unfortunately, the way that companies file their financials is kind of a little bit unstandardized. So they'll have different labels for certain line items, or they might have more data than other companies. So it makes it quite hard to compare companies, but there's a few tricks that I'm going to show you to get around that. But this is one of the shortcomings of using the as reported data. It is not checked and processed by new constructs. So here's the data format. This is the JSON format, and down below some handy links to help you. And you can see there's different ways. I can ask for the 10K, that's the annual filing, or I can ask for the last 2 quarterly filings. I'm going to go for the 10K. And again, I've got to append the my cloud token, which I have here somewhere. Here we go in my notes. Stick that on the end. And there's the data. Now, the last endpoint we looked at delivered a single point, and that's because we passed it a parameter. Not all of the endpoints work in that way. It'd be very time consuming, frankly, to call for all of this data. And actually, you would need to know how the company reported. You need to know all of those tags to be able to pull out a specific piece. So how do we get all of this data? And I know there's useful data in there because I can see interesting things in there. How do I get that into Excel? So that's what I'm going to show you next. There's a couple of steps here. So I've just taken a copy of that. I'm going to go into my screener, and now I'm going to use another new thing, perhaps for some people, which is I'm going to pull that data in from the web. So I went data from web, and I type in the URL. You can see why I copied it. It's a very long URL. So this is now opening Power Query. So this is where the fun starts. You can see at the top here that there's a command. You don't need to worry about the syntax or anything, but you can see in there in red, that's the URL for the data, okay? And the first thing I typically do is I convert that into a table. Just say okay there. And now Power Query knows that this data is in a tabular format, and I can now hit on this icon, and it's now listed all of the items, financial items in the filing. Really cool. So you can pull all of these in, but what I'm going to do, I'm just going to pick a few. I'm just going to go down the list. I'm going to look for assets. I do depreciation because I want to calculate EBITDA. Did I miss earnings per share? There's earnings per share. We're going to need that in a minute. Gross profit, maybe. I like to do maybe liabilities, net income loss. And I'm choosing these quite carefully as well-known line items, which are more likely to be common across lots of companies. Stockholders' equity. And then let's have the share counts. And then all this stuff at the end is stuff that we put in to make it easy to use the data, right? So I'm just going to select all that. Remember to untick this, and then hit OK. And look, now it's brought in, lovely. It's brought in all this data. And so this is the data for, I think it was Ford. OK. Oh no, it's Apple. Right. If I were to go back to here and change this to a different company, it would pull in a different set of data, right? So we're doing Apple. Now, the great thing about Power Query is I can kind of manipulate this data before I load it into Excel. So the first thing I like to do is to move that that key, the ticker, to be the right at the beginning of the list. So I do that by doing move, and I can do to beginning. Boom. So that's moved Apple over here. The other thing I like to do is you'll see there's some dates here. So the period end, that's the period, the financial period end. And it's in this weird format. And Josh, our CTO, explained this is called the epoch. This is called the epoch time. And it's used by coders. It's different to regular time. And he told me how to adjust for that. And the great thing about Power Query is I can apply that adjustment. And the adjustment is in 2 stages. You have to divide it by 864, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, and that's something like the number of microseconds in a day, something like that. And then the epoch period starts on a different day to the Excel date. So I need to add a number on here, and that magic number, still can't remember, is 25569. Okay, and that now looks a bit more like an Excel number, and Power Queries actually doesn't know that's a date until I tell it. So I go, that's a date. And now it's in that regular date format. And I could do that with the other dates in here. Okay, so I think I'm good to go. And I'm just going to, I'm going to name this. Let's call it Fundies. And then I'm going to load it. So I go home, close and load. I'm going to close and load it to a new page, new worksheet. And there's the data. So we're in business. So we've got Apple's data, but Apple's not in my list. Okay, so let me go back to here. There's an important step. So if you recall, the first thing I need to do is to create that URL. So that's where we were. That's the Apple data in that format. And I'm going to paste it into here, and I'm going to call this as reported URL. And I'm going to do what I did before. I'm going to make this into a variable, right? So equals this is a much easier one to do, and reference the ticker and just the rest of the URL. I've got 2 of those in there. Now, one thing I like to do, because I mess these up all the time, is I'm just going to copy that and put it back into here. Okay, right, so there's Microsoft. So I know that URL works, and I'm pretty sure if I'd copied that one, I'll get IBM data. So how do I get this to kind of be applied to this? It's pretty straightforward. So you'll notice I've got this sidebar loaded over here, and this is the query that I've just created, the Fundies query. And the first thing I want to do is to turn that into a function that I can pass these URLs to. And that's a very simple step. So I basically go back into the Power Query, and I go to Advanced Editor. Okay, so the first thing I want to do, and I always forget this, so let me get to my notes, is I add, I know I said there was no coding. This is not coding. This is just copying and pasting. So I'm going to be passing it a URL, and it's going to be coming from a table. Right? I don't really know what that means, but that's what you have to type. And then this is the fixed URL. Remember, we did Apple. And now I want it I want that to be a variable. And that's it. That's all the coding you have to do. And at the bottom, it'll even tell you if you've made a mistake. So I hit done. And now that Power Query is now a function. I'm going to rename that. I'm going to call it FX Fundies now because it's a function. And so if I was to type in that long URL into there, it would give me that table back. So that's the first step. The second step, so let me just close this. keep. And the table's disappeared because it's now a function. Don't need to worry about it anymore. So now I need to get this URL into that function. And the way to do that is, this is where I have to look at my notes. That's right. So what I need to do is to invoke Power Query, but the way I do it is I invoke it from a table range. Okay. So I've just loaded that table and you can see what it looks like. Ticker, latest price. That's what we built. That's basically our screener. And the first thing I want to do is just kind of remove the columns I don't need for this step. The way I like to do that is I select the columns I want to keep and I do remove other columns, right? So I've cleaned that up a bit and you can see on the right-hand side, I should have explained that these steps are kind of building, okay? So now I've got this URL and what I want to do is to kind of expand that URL to be that table. And the way I do that is I add a column and I do a custom column, okay? So that custom column I can give a title, which is fetch. I call it fetch Fundies. And here, what I want to do is invoke the function FX Fundies. So I just put FX in there, it found it. And then I want to pass it this URL, the URL in this table. Okay, double click, close, and that's it. No syntax errors. Now you'll get this flash up. This is really just a disclaimer thing, warning you that you're going to access an external site. Obviously, this site is highly reliable because it's us, IEX Cloud. Save. You only have to do that once, by the way. And now I've got a new column called Fetch Fundies with table in. That's what I was looking for. And it's for Microsoft and IBM. Now what I can do is I can expand that like I did before. And here are my fields, right, for each of those companies. Okay, I don't want to have that column prefix. And there we go. I've created a table which is data from those two companies. And you will notice, this is my point about XBRL, that some of these fields are inconsistently filled in, right? Most of them are good, right? So I've got gross profit, but for both companies, okay, which is good. But sometimes you'll have the odd gap because a company might have used a different tag or a different approach. Okay, so I'm nearly done. So all I need to do is go back to home, close and load. And I'm going to load it. I think I'll load it back to that empty spreadsheet I had. And there you go. It's here. And I just realized I meant to have taken out this column. So what I can do is, and I haven't renamed it either. So I can go back in here and go, I don't want that column because that's a duplicate. I'll just hit remove. It's just added another command in there to remove that. And I've got a ticker and a key as well. I don't really need that either. It's redundant. So I've just cleaned that up and I'm going to call this Fundies. And then I basically close and load. So now I've got Microsoft, IBM, some fundamental data, and all I need to do now, this is the easy step, is get that into here. How do I do that? Let's choose earnings per share diluted. Okay, so I want to get EPS in there. Copy and paste as a heading. And I'm going to use another function called match. And all match does is it finds in a list what the offset is. So I want to find that title in my table. Oops. I think I lost it. Oh, crikey, it did it. Huh. I must have double clicked on headers. So, and actually, because I'm going to copy this across, I don't want to use, I actually want to use D1 It doesn't seem to copy across very well. So that's the offset. So I need to go 5 across. And now what I can do is I can do a VLOOKUP. And I'm going to, oops, spell it right. And I'm going to look up Microsoft. And there's probably a better way of doing this, but this is how I do it. I'm going to look up it in this data. And the great thing about tables is you'll see in a minute, when the table gets longer, all of these things automatically adjust. Offset by that. And by the way, I meant to put a 0 in there to make it an exact match, which is always a good thing to do. So I've done that. And then I'm going to type in false here to make it an exact match. Do not tell me why, do not ask me why they use a 0 for exact match and false for a different function. But anyway, so that should give me, if I put it in a format, that is the PE ratio for those two companies. Sorry, that's the earnings per share for those two companies. And then it's kind of trivial to calculate the PE because that is the price divided by the earnings. So Microsoft is trading at 40 times trailing, IBM at almost 12 times. One's of growth stock, one's maybe a value stock. And now I can start to extend my table. Now you'll notice that I'm getting hash NAs in here. And that's because this table's not reloaded. So all I have to do is go data, refresh all, hits our API and pulls the data in. And one thing just on our API, every time you hit our API, it charges you some credits. But if you pull that data previously, at least in the previous month, you won't get charged for it. So if you're doing a big analysis and you pull the data and then you switch to another company and switch back, you won't be charged every time you switch. So that's one key attribute of our platform. So that's how to build a screener. We've got about 10 minutes left to do some Q&A. And then I'm happy to stay on for 10, 15 minutes after that if we want to. So back to you, Adam.
All right, cool. Thank you so much, Tim, for walking through your spreadsheet. We've had a lot of questions come in. I'm going to try to get through as many as I can. We'll have a lightning round, so we'll try to get through some more even that way. But first question is, the spreadsheet that you actually showcased early on, is that something that will be publicly available? A lot of folks are really interested in kind of getting access to it or learning more about it. How can people kind of gain access to that?
So it's my own work. So again, that disclaimer, but I'm more than happy to, we're going to put it on our website basically. So we'll have an area where we'll put sample spreadsheets, but also some how-tos explaining that. Hopefully people weren't trying to madly, take notes. And then hopefully we can get more people to contribute. So this is Excel. I'm not really a Google Sheets user. I know they have an add-in. I'm sure you can do a lot of this stuff. I grew up with, with Excel. As I have to say, I do have to say that Power Query is amazing. Once you start to play around with it, you can really get a lot of value out of it. One thing I didn't show was how, I use Power Query to combine the dividend data with the price data, because the price is every day and dividends are every quarter, and it just worked like a champ. It was very easy to work out. So adding data sets and combining it. But yeah, I'll make this available. I'll probably clean it up a bit and we'll get it on the site.
Cool. Yeah, a lot of questions came in about that. Probably the second most popular question was about Google Sheets. From your understanding, is IE Cloud available through Google Sheets? What's your thoughts on kind of?
To be honest, I haven't researched it, but it's on my list of things to do. So maybe this weekend I'll play around with Google Sheets. I know that, when I was researching, back over the holidays, I was looking at a lot of YouTube videos, and it seems that people, like Google as much as they do Excel. So more common, I think, for individuals. I think for businesses, they tend to be more Excel.
Right. Okay, cool. One of the questions that came in wasn't really focused on the sheet that you went through, but I thought it was just a good question to kind of answer. Are you actually able to place trades through IEX Cloud?
No, you're not. So IEX Cloud is a subsidiary of IEX Group, which does own an exchange, the Investors Exchange, and you can't trade through that as an individual. That, like all exchanges, they're attached to brokers. But we do have lots and lots of customers who are trading apps, and you can trade through those customers. So some of them attribute us as their data source, so you might be able to find them.
Great, cool. So one question that actually came in earlier for someone who I'm not sure was able to attend the presentation today. I had a question around open, high, low, close data. So yep. He's looking to pull 5 years of OHLC data for stock analysis. Can you kind of demonstrate or just kind of walk through how to do that with IEX Cloud data for Excel?
Yeah, so, and actually the first spreadsheet, this one, has that study in it. So this chart and this chart comes from our quotes endpoint. And if I go to, where is it? Price volume. So this is the output of the Power Query. But if I just go in and go look at the query, it's price volume. This is the query. So it's basically, and the way to pull a lot of data in for this type of study, you're not linking two tables together. It's really just a kind of single call. So it's very easy to put. It's basically this line of code where you're passing in a URL from a table, and the table happens to be called prices, and then you convert that table. I'm just going to step through this very quickly to convert it to a table, and then you expand the column, and there you have close, high volume, all the data you could need. This is for IBM because that was the last company we looked at. And if I wanted to, so this is a couple of years or maybe 3 years of data. If I just close that, I want to make sure I don't close the sheet, right? If I go to, I've got this like staging area where I build the URLs for some of these pieces. So if I go to the prices one, you'll see how I construct the URL, and you can see IBM is in there, and then I have a from to date. So if I wanted to do 5 years of data, I could basically put a from date of 5 years ago. And that's all you'd have to change. I think so here I can put in, that's 2013, so that's 7 years of data. If you just wanted, and this data is very cheap, so don't worry about putting 10 years or 5 years. And then it will construct the URL in the appropriate way for you. So again, I'll share this and I'll provide some pointers because this is quite a useful page in its own right. So hopefully that answered the question.
Excellent. We have maybe a couple more minutes left here, so I'll try to bust through a couple more. Someone named Constantine actually asked a question around the framework. So is there an industry standard or kind of an end-to-end framework or checklist or kind of process to perform fundamental analysis for a company? He mentioned many of the companies are clear, e.g. PE ratios, common P&L, and some other metrics. But is there a framework that puts all these kind of pieces together?
Yeah, I gave this a lot of thought, actually. I mean, if we've got any CFAs on the call, they'll know all about this. There are so many different ways of valuing a company. And it does take quite a while to try them all out. There are DCFs and there are, fundamental, kind of multiple based ways of doing this, analyzing the cash flows. There's lots of different steps to it. I think it really depends on what you're trying to do and your level of skill. I think on a personal level, I think it's going to vary, by, whether you want to be picking individual stocks, how deep you want to go. There are some good books out there. I didn't have a chance to kind of fish any out, but I think I would start with something pretty basic, and that's where I've been coming from in this webinar. but you can literally get very, very deep into this, right to kind of very specialized, kind of financial papers on the theory of finance. I think the hardest thing that I've always struggled with is trying to figure out what's built into the price of a security. And that's the hardest thing a fundamental analyst ever has to do. And to figure that out, the most important thing is to have really good data so you can historically see how a company has traded in the past. So I think kind of getting stuck in with some tools like this, playing around with the data, having fun with Fundies, and then reading around the topic. And there's some really good stuff on YouTube and on the internet to, and then look at a specific company, do what I do. You know, if you like an investment idea, don't just buy the stock, kind of step back and go, oh, let's play around with the numbers a bit. And you'd be surprised that it forces you to ask some questions. You might find yourself then wanting to look at filings, and you'll get drawn into this world of financial analysis.
Excellent. So we only have a couple of seconds left here, so we're going to do a lightning round. So hopefully this will be kind of yes/no questions. So is IEX Cloud data available for Chinese and European companies?
Yes and no. So we have quite a bit of global data, and we're onboarding more all the time. We do not have fundamentals yet for China or for any other non-US markets. Now it's an interesting one because China actually did a pretty good job implementing XBRL. And so, you know, one of the things on our list is to look at whether we can take the as reported data. And in their case, it's very standardized. So I'm hoping that we can get some of that data on through that form. And then, you know, we're working with new constructs on extending their coverage. Hopefully we can start covering some Canadian stocks and some other markets. But more to come. And then, of course, we do have price, you know, we have end of the day prices for pretty much every market. We have global macro data and lots of other data. But around Fundies, we're very North America at the moment. Excellent. So the answer is no.
Does IEX Cloud provide normalized earnings data?
Yes, we do. So the new constructs data is standardized, and in the premium offering, what I would call normalized. I think they mainly focus on cash adjustments to free cash flow. They have a really great report, by the way, which is again available on our premium site. And if you think of buying a stock and putting a few hundred or a few $1,000s into a stock, it's worth spending a few dollars to get their report, because it really will help you think about whether it's a good idea or not. So that would be my recommendation if you really want adjusted earnings numbers and earnings per share. And then we have obviously we have the company number that they report.
Excellent. So 2 more questions. So can you find industry averages using IEX Cloud?
Yeah, good question. For fundamentals, no. I worked on a project many years ago when I was based in Mexico, where I aggregated all the Mexican companies to create an index of corporate earnings for Mexico. It's actually not, you know, once you've got your data organized, you know, in this way, and you can pull it into Excel, you can generate those yourself. So I think that's one to put out to the community. If someone wants to have a go at doing that, I think that would be really interesting. Yeah, we'd be happy to publish that.
Excellent. And this is a kind of a fun question I always like to ask at the end of these, but I'm going to change it up a bit. For folks listening, can you recommend any podcast that you think would help folks kind of dive a little bit deeper into maybe the fintech world or the fundamental data analysis kind of world?
So there's one on the investing side that I listen to every week called The Disciplined Investor, and it's been around for a few years, I think. It's hosted by a guy called Andrew Horowitz. It's very topical in nature, so it's talking about how markets are doing. But I think Andrew, you know, is one of those investors or investment managers who really looks at fundamentals and technicals. So very smart guy, really good content, and lots of ideas as well, you know, that you might want to then go away and do your own research on.
Excellent, cool. So with that, there's a lot of questions we didn't get to, but I've made note of a lot of them. I'm going to probably send over to Tim for his viewpoint, and then we'll do our best to maybe put those up on our Twitter page. That's at IEX Cloud. So I'm going to quickly share my screen and kind of walk you through some of this stuff. So as Tim mentioned at the beginning, we have a bunch of resources that kind of highlight how to get started on IEX Cloud. There's a fantastic webinar we did a few months back that one of our support associates built out. To access that, you just have to go to iexcloud.io/blog. Additionally, we do have our own Excel plugin that pushes IEX Cloud data directly into Excel. To access that, we have another webinar that kind of walks you through how to do that. Just go to iexcloud.io/blog. We want your feedback. We've been doing a lot of these webinars. This is a very successful one. We had a lot of attendees, a lot of really great questions coming in today. Hopefully we'll respond to those on our Twitter page. So definitely follow IEX Cloud on Twitter. But we want your feedback. We'll also be sending a follow-up message either today or sometime in the next few days with some links. So definitely check that out. But other than that, I really want to thank everyone for joining today. This has been a fantastic webinar. I want to give a big thanks to Tim. So snaps to Tim for putting on this presentation.
It was fun.
Appreciate it. Good. I'm glad. We're going to be doing a lot more webinars coming up. There's some that we're planning for March and April and May. So stay tuned for that. But in the meantime, if you want to follow along with everything that we're doing at IEX Cloud, you can check out our LinkedIn page, or definitely, as I've mentioned before, check out our Twitter page at iexcloud.com. But other than that, again, I want to thank you all for joining today. And yeah, we'll see you to the next one.
Thanks, Adam. Bye now.
See you guys.